Our text today comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15, beginning in verse 33. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, listen, he is calling for Elijah. And someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink, saying, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down. Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Now when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, truly this man was the Son of God. The word of God for the people of God. Today is our last sermon in the series of 3 called When Life Hurts. And today the title is Forsaken. As we wrap up this sermon series, I want to ask you a question, and you don't have to raise your hand. Have you ever felt forsaken or abandoned? I think most of us probably have at one time in our lives, right? When things were going on in our life that were just so difficult that we felt abandoned by everybody, including God. And sometimes the abandonment was real. I mean, I've known couples that have gone through divorces, and when that happens, sometimes the family is so afraid of being perceived as taking sides, or they don't know what to say or what to do, that they just don't show up, and people feel abandoned by their family. Sometimes in the midst of marital difficulties and it becomes a public matter with the family doesn't know what to do. They don't know how to handle it. They don't know what to say, so they just stay away. And we begin to feel abandoned and forsaken and alone. You guys know my history with my brother-in-law. He was a very severe alcoholic before he died a year ago. Well, not quite a year ago. I'm sure he felt forsaken and abandoned because some of the people in our family just said, I'm not dealing with this anymore, and had nothing to do with him. And I got to the point, after 20 years of dealing with it, that his behavior became so erratic and so unpredictable that I didn't want to deal with it. And I'm sure that in the process, he felt alone, abandoned, and forsaken. Have you ever been there? When I had my electrical contracting company and the bubble burst in 2008, I was starting to struggle a little bit keeping things going because I had like 7 employees and my insurance was through the roof every month, and I was spending almost $10,000 a month in material to keep up. And as general contractors who I'd worked for years began to sense that I was struggling, they abandoned me. They took the blueprints and lighting plans that I drew and gave them to other electricians to implement and cut me completely out and made me feel alone and abandoned. It's a common experience to feel forsaken. Jesus also felt forsaken, but not for the reasons we might believe. I think because he was quoting the second verse of Psalm 22, his forsakenness wasn't really about God. It was about his life. His disciples, when he was arrested, scattered and were watching in the shadows from the distance. They'd abandoned him. His religious tradition of Judaism had abandoned him and actually were co-conspirators with Rome to put him to death. The Roman Empire had abandoned him, who promised peace and prosperity, bread and circus for everybody. Jesus felt abandoned. My God, why have you forsaken me? See, the theory is that one of the reasons that God became incarnate is so that he could experience what we experience. Personally, up close, physically. That God came in the form of man so that he could experience life and death and joy and pain and suffering and all the things that we felt so that he could walk with us. But Jesus felt more than just abandoned. He was in immense pain. The cross behind me, if it was about another foot taller, it would probably be to scale according to archaeologists and historians. The average cross was anywhere from 6 to 9 feet tall. And that picture you see where they're up in the air, 30 feet up, that didn't happen. It would have been impossible. People were trying to teach them, the painters were trying to send a different message. So what would happen is we believe that the earliest use of the cross that we know of is Babylonia. And we believe that the Babylons taught the Assyrians about the cross, and then the Syrians taught the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians taught the Romans. And the Romans first began to use the cross. It wasn't a method of execution. It was a method of torture and sending a message. If you rebelled against Rome, if you were a criminal in the Roman Empire, they would hang you on one of these crosses and put you outside the city gates, one, to punish you, not to kill you, but to punish you. And the stuff that would happen afterwards, it would take you years to heal from. They also put you out there to be a warning to anybody else who thought they might want to rebel against Rome to not do it. But it was never meant to be a device of capital punishment until later in the Roman world. We've got a lot of misconceptions about what happens on the cross. We've all seen those pictures where, the feet are overlapping and nailed, and that, in fact, did probably nail some people up that way, but archaeology has found pieces of nail in the ankle bone, and now we believe that what happened is rather than being like this, their ankles were through like that. And they went through the ankle bones because they're much stronger, less likely to tear than the foot. We also now know that they probably ran the nails through right here between the radius and ulna below the hand because the bones in your hand will just rip out under weight, but these will let you hang there so much longer. It was a horrible instrument of torture and death. It could take anybody from 6 hours to several days to die on this cross. And what killed them wasn't the cross. What killed them was either exposure or asphyxia. Because as they hung there on that cross, their rib cage would collapse. And you can't breathe with a collapsed rib cage. And pretty soon, there's a lack of oxygen to all your organs, to your brain, to your muscles, and the pain intensifies and the aches increase. And every time you think you want to take a breath, you have to pull up on those nails and rotate on those nails on your ankles in excruciating pain and take in a deep breath. And the pain would be so intense, you'd have to let yourself back down, and your rib cage would crush your lungs. And in a little while, you need to do that again. So every time Jesus said one of the 7 things that we've been told he said in the Gospels, he had to pull up on those nails. He had to take a deep breath and then say what he said. John, this is your mother. Mom, this is your son. I commend my spirit into your hands. It is finished. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Why, oh, why have you forsaken me? And I don't believe that Jesus thought for a moment that God had forsaken him. And anybody who would have heard him recite the 2nd verse of Psalm 2 would have probably been familiar with the whole psalm. And the psalm goes on to talk about how even in the midst of the most dire circumstances, God has always been there for Israel and for his people. When they were beat up and put upon, God was there to rescue them. They always trusted God because he had never, ever failed them. And right now you're going, yeah, but he failed Jesus because Jesus died. No, he didn't. Because Jesus rose again. God came to God's rescue. In the midst of feeling abandoned and forsaken and in intense pain and dying from a lack of oxygen, Jesus wasn't saying that God had forsaken him. He said that that's why when it feels that way, we know that if we keep reading that psalm, that God has always come to the rescue of those he loves, and that's everybody. It doesn't always feel like it, but he does. Sometimes it takes a while, but he does. But here's what's important, is in the process of going through these times when life hurts, in every instance in my life, it's turned me back to God. It's made me closer to God. It's helped in my understanding of who God is, what my responsibilities are, and how much he loves me. Whether it was my parents' divorce, my daughter's illness, my wreck, eventually losing my wife, the death of a son-in-law in a tragic accident. Each and every one of those drove me closer to understanding who God was. And in every situation, eventually, there was a silver lining. It doesn't happen all the time, but it can. God doesn't forsake what he loves. Your friends might, your family might, your church family might, but God never will. It's during those times where we have to dig in deeper. I mean, if you were an athlete and you were struggling, you would just work harder, right? Well, why should it be any different with our faith? If things aren't going our way, if we're struggling, why would we abandon God because we think he abandoned us? Why wouldn't we dig our heels in deeper and pray more and study more and seek out help more to get through that difficult time when we feel alone, hurt, or forsaken? It doesn't make any sense that we just quit. And yet a new statistic says that 2.7 million people are leaving their faith traditions every year because we tell them things like, well, God must have brought that into your life to teach you a lesson, to make you a better person. And other things, by the way. It's not just that. I honestly don't know how to end this sermon. I've been fighting this for a week now. Because I want you to walk away with this sense after these 3 sermons that life isn't hopeless. Even when bad things happen, God is still there. But so much of that is in how we decide to perceive what happens to us. And that's called faith. That's where the rubber meets the road. When a bad thing happens to you, are you going to blame God? Or are you going to believe God forsook you? Or are you going to look for the real reasons that those bad things might have happened and look to God for the strength and comfort to get through it? Because God never leaves. The Psalms say our fathers trusted in him and were never disappointed. Never.